Okay, hello everyone and welcome to today's structured conversation, Learning Analytics, Big Data, and Their Relationship to Student Affairs with Dr. Matthew Bichsel, Director of Assessment and Planning in the Division of Student Affairs at Indiana-Purdue University in Indianapolis. My name is Mary Lee Demeter and I will serve as your moderator today. On behalf of the SAL Professional Development Committee, I thank you for participating in today's structured conversation. I also want to thank Dr. Bichsel, the SAL Professional Development Committee, and colleagues Shelley Ann Pleasance and Margot Salton Saul from Northern Arizona University for all of their help in putting today's presentation together. A few logistics before we get started. Please feel free to adjust the size of your chat box here on the left more closely to monitor our conversation. I also encourage you to participate by asking questions, sharing comments, and providing feedback through the chat feature, and also by using the various tools offered in the menu located above the chat room window. Using this first icon here, you can insert emoticons next to your name, or you can indicate that you've stepped away from the session using this little timer with the person. It'll show that you're away. And if you'd like to raise your hand at any point to speak during the conversation, you tap the little hand icon. And we won't be doing too much polling today, but at one point we will ask you to respond to a brief yes/no poll. So this little check mark is how you can respond to that. Again, while we are primarily using the chat room for questions or comments today, if you do have a microphone and wish to ask a question or offer a comment, please raise your hand using the little hand icon I showed you, and I will turn on your mic. And finally, feel free, as you can see, Dr. Bichsel has chatted out, sharing the learning and the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag SAAssess, and you could tweet to Dr. Bichsel, me, or the SAA leaders directly using our handles that are located in the chat window. So let's get started with today's structured conversation. In recent years, learning analytics and big data have been increasingly come of greater use in institutions of higher education. In particular, products that allowed for the prediction of which students may be at some risk of doing poorly in courses or their academic careers have become more and more prominent. Bichsel defines analytics as, quote, the use of data, statistical analysis, and explanatory and predictive models to gain insights and act on complex issues. Many institutions around the country, and indeed the world, have begun exploring the use of analytics as a means of increasing student success. This structured conversation will provide an overview of analytics and how institutions have successfully leveraged analytics. Theoretical approaches for applying analytics and considerations for implementation on campuses will be shared as well. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our discussion leader today. Dr. Matthew Bichsel joined the Indiana-Purdue University, Indianapolis Division of Student Affairs in October of 2014. As Director of Assessment and Planning, Matt provides leadership and expertise in the design, implementation, and interpretation of assessment programs related to student development as impacted by the division's programming and services. He directs assessment and program evaluation related to ongoing improvement and students' cognitive, social, and emotional development. Prior to joining Indiana-Purdue, Matt spent more than 10 years at Purdue University, serving as a research scientist and also serving the Department of Student Success at Purdue in 3 roles: as Senior Assistant Director/Coordinator of Evaluation and Administration, as the Assistant Director/Coordinator of Databases and Statistics, and as the Coordinator of Entrepreneurial and Multicultural Learning Communities. Prior to his work at Purdue, Matt held positions within residence life at Tulane University and Ferris State University. In addition, Dr. Bichsel has served in a variety of roles within the John N. Gardner Institute for Excellence in Undergraduate Education, including Fellow for Analytics and Innovation, Technical Team Member, and Chair of the Predictive Analytics Solution Committee. Now sit back, relax, and join the conversation as Dr. Bichsel helps us understand learning analytics, big data, and their relationship to student affairs. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you very much, Mary Lee, and welcome to all of you joining us from everywhere that you're joining us from. I do encourage you to join in this conversation and share what you're learning and questions that you have across Twitter in the chat box. If you tweet at me directly, I'm happy to write you back. It just probably won't be until tonight. Just so you're aware, don't be, why isn't he writing me back? Well, one, I'm presenting, and then two, we've got these day job things. And so please feel free to ask questions. I'm happy to get back to you. It just may not be immediately. So let's talk a little bit real quickly here about what it is I hope we're going to do today. We're going to define both analytics and big data. I'm hoping that you're going to be able to describe analytics and big data concepts that you can use in your work. I'm also aiming for you to be able to articulate ways analytics might be applied on your own campuses, potentially in your daily work in the fullness of time, and then at the end of the day, being able to compare and contrast some benefits and challenges. I don't have specific slides for most of these. It'll be woven into the talk, but if we get to the end and I haven't hit something, let me know, or if I haven't hit something for your own likeness, let me know and we can see what we can do to revisit that. But we're going to start with this broad concept of big data because that's what we hear about all the time. Big data this, big data that. At the end of the day, Gartner, which is a consulting firm, talks about big data being this high volume, high velocity, or high variety information. And all of these things work together to allow us to make enhanced decisions and enhance our decision making, as well as some insights and process optimization. But these are really, at the end of the day, big data is really these three V's, the big volume, this velocity, and the variety. So when you're talking about big data, you're really talking about every piece of data you have, and every piece you've ever had, and every piece you're ever going to have. There's not a sample of data. We're not doing population sampling. We're not looking at a specific segment. We're looking at everybody. It's often velocity is brought up because it's a real-time function. This is often data that is happening as we go. A key example of this would be when you're on Amazon and you look at a product and you scroll to the bottom and all of a sudden you have this changing list of things that other people who looked at this also purchased or also looked at, or things that bought this, or people that bought this thing will also purchase these things as well. That's a real-time analysis that's happening. Frankly, it takes longer to render on the screen than it does to actually determine what things ought to be shown to you. That's how fast things usually move. And then variety, clearly, it's pulling from all sorts of things all over the place, to use very technical terms. We're pulling text, images, audio, video. So at the end of the day, really, we're not doing it in higher education. While we are dealing with very large sets of data, we are often not talking about big data. We're talking about relative big data, and it is big to us, particularly in higher ed, because we don't deal with millions, if not billions, of rows of data. And so from a relative standpoint, it is big, but when you take these volume, velocity, and variety components into account, we're technically not talking about big data. I'm not saying don't stop talking about big data on your campuses. Go ahead and do it. Just understand the definition that's behind the things that we're talking about here. But when we talk analytics, and this is one of the opportunities for you to have a little bit of participation here. You can do it by chat. If you've got a mic and you want to be opened up, let us know. You can raise your hand by using the little hand button at the top of your screen. But when I say analytics, or when you hear analytics, what does that mean to you?
Now, when I think of analytics, I think of it as looking at data in more than one way.
Okay.
In multiple methods to kind of figure out what's going on there.
Sure. Anybody else? Does anybody else want to type something? Here we go. Bill Heinrich from MSU talks about analytics is making sense and adding value from a given perspective. So looking at things from multiple points, using data to drive decision making, trying to add value. What else? Any other thoughts? That's okay. So if you have other thoughts, feel free to share them. I'm going to share with you 6 definitions of analytics, and you're going to say 6. Why 6? Well, let's be frank. The field of analytics, which is frankly truncated from academic analytics, is only been named since 2005. Two researchers that worked with EDUCAUSE named the field Goldstein and Katz, and physically put a name called academic analytics on it about 11 years ago. And so we are a young field and still trying to figure out where is our place in higher education, what is the best place for us, what's the space for us to operate in, and what are the best ways for us to operate. Pam Sheffin from University of Houston has shared that she thinks of discovery, interpretation, and communication of data. And I really like that third part there, the communication piece, because to me, and you're going to see this in all 6 of the definitions I'm going to show you in a moment, is that it's all about action. We want to make sure that we are taking data and not just understanding what we've got, not just making sense of it, but actually doing something with it and then analyzing that. And so there's lots of different uses of the word. You hear about business intelligence, big data, which we've already established is kind of a form of or the basis for a lot of our analytics work. And then we've got some higher education analytics components. We often hear about the student pipeline. Our colleagues in admissions will often use it, whether they call it analytics or not. We'll use some form of analytics to predict who the most likely successful students are going to be in helping them make decisions as to who should be admitted or not if we're at a selective institution. We talk about using analytics to improve retention and student success. We do some historical analytics or analysis to understand how we got to where we are. We try to predict the future. We talk about learner relationship management and the way in which we're talking to students and recruiting new ones and working with the ones that we have on campus. We talk about data mining, which is a huge component of analytics. Some folks will tell you that data mining is its own thing, and they are very ardent about that. I will tell you that I do not believe that it's its own thing, that it is complete and a part of the process of analytics. So data mining and analytics to me coexist. They are not mutually exclusive processes, but that is my bent and not everybody's. And then lifelong success. We can look at alumni and how we are best going to work with them over time. So SOLAR, which is the Society for Learning Analytics Research. And they're kind of the first ones to kind of start grasping with this notion of learning analytics. It starts talking about the measurement, collection, analysis, and reporting of data about learners and their contexts. And so it's really important that we're not just talking about the learners themselves, but we're also talking about where the learning is taking place and being able to understand how environments can be changed to help learning. EDUCAUSE, which if you're not familiar with EDUCAUSE, it's a fabulous organization. Your IT colleagues, it's essentially their ACPA or NASPA. It's educause.edu. They've got great technology resources as they pertain to education. I encourage you to check those out if you're interested. But they talk about evaluating large data sets to provide decision makers with information that can help determine the best course of action for an organization. So it's really not just looking for information, but also determining these action points. Van Barneveld, Arnold, and Campbell, with whom I used to work at Purdue University, none of whom are at Purdue any longer, talk about using analytic techniques to help target instructional curriculum and support resources. So now we're using data not just to learn about our learners, but to figure out how we can affect them. Cooper moves into even deeper, talking about developing actionable insights by defining problems and then applying various statistical models and analysis to the data you've got, to simulated data, to future data, again, in an effort to take action on something that we've learned. And the last two, from Washington, Lon and Teasley from the University of Michigan, talk about using data to inform decision-making, leveraging data so that we can identify students that need help before they know they need help oftentimes, and then allowing direct user interaction with tools to engage in some form of sense-making. So here, what they're trying to advocate for is taking data out of the hands of just the administrators, but also putting it directly into the hands of students and saying, here's your data, here's what we think, why don't you tell us too, and help them, have them make sense of their own information. And then finally, Bichsel, who's part of EDUCAUSE, maybe provides the most succinct definition here, but the use of data, statistical analysis, and explanatory and predictive models to gain insights and act on complex issues. And that action word comes up again. It really is about taking action. It is not just enough for us to learn something and write a report about it, because what will happen is that report will sit on our desks and gain dust, or sit in our computers and gain digital dust, and then we'll blow it off once in a while and see, oh yeah, we figured something out about that. But it really is this action-taking point, I think, that separates analytics from simple reporting. To get into some basic terminology, just so as you're talking with folks on your campuses about these things, analytics is a broad, overarching concept. It happens at all levels of our institution, usually from a top level and is going down from there. Then we get into academic analytics, which only looks at the institution itself. It's a process for providing higher ed institutions with data so that we can support operational and financial decision making. Note here in academic analytics, we're talking about the institution itself. We're not really talking about students, we're not talking about learning. We're talking about really high level, how ought we do things in general type of questions. Learning analytics takes us into the learner. It's not the learning component, looking at the department and the course and trying to make instructional curricular support resources that support learning goals. And then finally, predictive analytics is exactly what it sounds like. It's using data to predict the future and so that we can act on it in an effort to potentially change the future. It's really powerful stuff. And that's, I say, both figuratively and literally. It really is very powerful when we can apply data in ways that will change our own actions and the actions of our students and the actions of our institutions for the better and to focus on students. Conceptually, this takes the last 3 or 4 slides and really just kind of puts it into one slide here. Business analytics and academic analytics. If you think outside of higher education, they have this concept called business analytics or business information, or business intelligence is often the word that we hear. It is akin to academic analytics, but where business intelligence often just sits at that upper level, we also have a lower level in here too. We have the learners at stake. And from there, we move into predictive analytics, into actionable intelligence, and into decision-making from there, and then ultimately taking some form of action. There's a broader concept here, though, that I want you all to think about as you're talking about this or thinking about it on your own campuses. And that is this notion of scholarship of teaching and learning. Your faculty colleagues, and frankly yourselves, we learn about our students when we interact with them through programming. We try to adjust what it is that we're doing so that we meet the needs of our students, and we're trying new techniques. It's why we go to conferences and find out how other places are doing things. It's why we have conversations like this, so that we can have a very clear understanding of what's going on and work to meet the needs. This scholarship of teaching and learning notion is a body of evidence that can be contributed to by anyone who does any form of teaching. And in higher ed, all of us are educators. All of us have the opportunity to put some sort of theory behind our work and move forward towards helping students learn, apply what they're learning in the classroom, and really become a full, holistic student, well-rounded person. And so when you're thinking about analytics, don't just pay attention to this learning analytics and then right into predictive. Recognize that there's a process that's behind all of this that we can contribute to as educators, and that our faculty are already contributing to, and learning analytics will simply give us an insight into that and allow us to move the entire field forward. So when we get down to the heart of it, though, analytics really kind of have these 6 things attached to them. There is a technology infrastructure and tools and applications that is a part of analytics. There's no beating around the bush on this one. You have to have very good technology resources in order to be able to do this well. There are policies and processes and practices on our own campuses that are going to be either created or affected by our use of analytics. I will tell you right now that it is very highly likely that you have policies on campus surrounding the use of data that conflict with one another. And when we get into using analytics and applying analytics on our campuses, we tend to find some of these conflicts. And it can be challenging from the institutional point of view. But it's very important that we do recognize kind of how these things work. You've got the skills of those on your campus, your faculty, your staff, yourselves, students, other stakeholders. Analytics, and I will re-emphasize this in a bit, but you don't have to rush out and buy something in order to do analytics on your campus. You have to have access to data, and you have to have access to analysis tools. And you've got lots of people who both have access to those things and know how to deal with those things that you can engage with on your campuses. I mentioned a bit earlier, we do talk culture and behaviors. The cultures of our institutions will dictate the extent to which analytics can be applied well or not, can be grown or not, and will dictate our behaviors as an institution and as individuals as well. Leadership at the institutional level is key, particularly if you don't have analytics and you're looking to engage. It is really important to have your presidents and provosts and vice chancellors and folks who are the key decision makers, the strategy makers on your campuses, get involved in these conversations. And then finally, it involves cycles. This is not a one and done thing. This is a cycle that talks about moving from gathering data to predicting or acting on something, or making an analysis, predicting or analyzing on something, acting on whatever it is you've predicted or analyzed, monitoring your actions, and then refining your process in the fullness of time, and then going back to gathering more data. Think of this like Chickering's vectors, where they're really a spiral, not so much a cycle, and that you will revisit each of these points many, many times as you are both implementing and refining the way that you are engaging with analytics on your own campuses. When I think about analytics from a very high level, these are the questions I think about. When somebody says, Matt, we're thinking about analytics, we don't really understand it or why we would want to go there. These are the 5 questions that I often will come back to. What can institutions do to improve student success? And in all of these, you can take out institutions and insert my institution, or what can I do? So you can make it very much about yourselves, your units, your divisions, your departments, or your institutions. But broadly, we want to talk about what can institutions do to improve student success? What can institutions do to use existing resource across the board without having to go out and invent new things? What existing information do you already have that you can identify students at risk? And I will point out here that every single student on your campus is at risk of leaving your campus for one reason or another, from the lowest qualified academically to the highest qualified academically, from the lowest involved to the highest involved. Every single student has an opportunity to potentially be leaving your institution. And so we talk about levels of risk. You have low levels, high levels, and then levels in between. So I encourage you to not talk about at-risk students, because then you're talking about everybody. So it's students at risk, and then at risk of what? Fourth, how can students become self-aware of what they need to do to be successful? So part of this process is not just using data to figure out how students are doing, but also helping students understand what they need to do so that they can succeed. These are emerging adults. We are teaching them many, many skills that are going to be useful to them in the fullness of time, and so we want them to utilize those pieces. And then ultimately, how can we make a strategic impact at scale using analytics? How can we, using data, not only make better decisions, but do inform our work and our actions and our behaviors to affect not just the work that we individually are doing, but the work as an institution. The scale part is really, really important. But why should we even go down this road? Because that's usually the next question I get. So why should we do analytics? And those are the 5 questions. Or what are we going to get out of analytics if we get there? And those are the 5 questions we just talked to. And folks will then say, great, but to what end? Well, there's kind of, in my mind, there's these 4 key areas. We want to increase faculty, staff to student communication. We know from theory, and it doesn't matter which retention theorist you talk to, they all will mention somewhere that the relationship with faculty and staff is key to the extent to which students will be retained. And so this gives us an opportunity to increase that. We want to increase student awareness of where they're standing and what their potential eventual outcome will be if they don't change their behaviors. This is not coddling. This is not hand-holding. This is good pedagogy. It's simply a good idea to tell students where they are and what they can do to improve. It allows us to involve others, their advisors, folks like ourselves, in student success efforts so that it moves it out of just the academic realm and into the co-curricular and student affairs realm as well. And then ultimately, and I've said this several times and I'll reiterate it again, it does allow us to instigate behavior change. We can change the behavior of our students from the extent to which they are working with their data, working in their classes, doing specific behaviors that we want them to be doing. We can change the behaviors of our faculty and our staff in the ways they work with students and interact with folks. And then we can ultimately, when we put things together and have a very intentional and strategic use of analytics on our campuses, we ultimately have the opportunity to change the behavior of our institution and move us out of a realm of doing what's best for the institution and into a realm of doing what's best for the student, always having the student-centered approach while keeping in mind the needs of the institution as well. Why? This is the big question. Does anybody have any thoughts as to why we should be doing these kinds of things, why we should be taking data and applying it in ways that are going to change our students, our faculty, our staff, ourselves, our institution, our behavior, and things along those lines? Why do you suppose that this has become so prevalent in the last 10 years and really, really prevalent in the last 5? Any thoughts? Go ahead and chat them out or speak them if your mic is available. Accountability is one very good point. Relevance. We want students to succeed. Those are great answers. Any other thoughts? Efficiencies, sure, we have efficiency at scale. Jason's echoing Shelley in that we want students to succeed. Demonstrating our value, yes, definitely. Great. Leverage resources, being competitive, confirmation bias, it's easy to misunderstand, sure. Yeah, we do a lot of anecdotal data, right? Or anecdata, as I call it. And we kind of want to get away from that. We really want to be able to show that we know what we know. Can't always work harder, we've got to work smarter. I don't know that any of us can work harder than most of us already are. And so to some extent, Alice, I think you're nailing it right on the head. To understand our impact and the work that we're doing and the effort that's coming out of these pieces. These are all really, really good strategic operational components. I want to take us a step backwards, and I want to show you this picture. This picture is from 1356. And in the 14th century, this is Heinricus teaching his students. He's giving a lecture. You've got a group of students in the lower right-hand corner where the circle is. You've got one sleeping. So 650 years ago, this is what we were envisioning learning to be. Fast forward to, on any of our campuses, this is a 200-student lecture hall. And what do we have? Lower right-hand corner, you have a lecture. If the field was wide enough, you'd have somebody standing there giving a lecture. And up in the middle, top left-hand side, you've got somebody still sleeping. What it says to me is, over 650 years or more, we haven't changed the way we've taught. Functionally, we have changed the way we deliver services. We have changed the way we interact with our students. But how we teach students ultimately has not changed for 650 or more years. And this is a challenge. When we start applying data, we have the ability to really begin to find the student at risk. But how do you find him or her or them when you don't know where they are? It's really, really probably one of the more difficult components. Now, for those of you who are searching for Waldo, Waldo's up here. But the trick here is to get Waldo to graduation, right? The bigger trick, though, is how you find Waldo in a sea of Waldos. Everybody's at risk. And so how do you identify where to apply your efforts, where to think about, do you want to do blanket approaches? Do you want to do targeted approaches? Data can give us the information we need to be able to do those things. When we come down to it, analytics talks about actionable intelligence. It puts the action back into actionable intelligence. It's about moving our research to practice. Somebody noted that we want to make sure that we are understanding our narrative with actual data. This allows us to do that. We have theories behind the work that we do, and we put them into practice. This allows us to put our research on what we know students need to do to be successful and see what happens when we actually put those things out there. It becomes the basis for design in terms of our programming and our interventions, for pedagogy in terms of the way that we teach and the way that we interact with students in learning environments, which for the record is every environment we have on campus. And then it also becomes a basis for self-awareness, not only for the students, because we do want them to become self-aware, but we also want to become self-aware of our work and our role in this process. It's about changing institutional culture, as I've already stated, about getting into the mindset of using data to provide what's best for the student. And it's about understanding limitations and risks associated with data. Data can tell us a lot. Data cannot tell us everything. Data usually does not come with nuance. Data usually does not come with a lot of context. And so the limitations and risk are associated with those components. And being able to understand what it is we're doing, how we're doing it, and what we need to be doing in order to change the behaviors that we're looking to change. There are myths, though, as well. A lot of folks will say, well, analytics is a solitary process. I can do it on my own. No, you can't. Not well. I worked with a campus 3 or 4 years ago that in 3 years bought 3 different things. and after each one, they said, it doesn't work. Well, that's because one office was operating by itself and trying to make decisions for everyone. It really is this is the whole, it takes a village, it takes a university to do analytics well. You can start small, but it really, in the fullest, it really is going to require total university effort to be able to do the things that you want. Another myth is that it's always complex sets of algorithms that no one understands. And while that is the case, sometimes it is not always the case. When I was at Purdue, we built a system there, and we started it with Excel and SPSS. And we were doing simple correlations and least squares regressions. Very low-level statistics that can be easily explained. It does not have to be something like neural networking. It does not have to be something like machine learning. Those both exist. Those are both very, very powerful. But so is just simply looking at data and making a decision to act based on what you've got using the tools and the ways that you know how to examine data. It's a process that doesn't include students. This is not true. The students are usually the direct beneficiary or the direct folks being affected by the work that you're doing. So it's important to include them in whatever it is you're going to be doing. And that it's just a fad. Institutions can ignore using data to make decisions. They can't, and we know this. You know this. You've got to support the work that you do by collecting data and demonstrating the value that you're bringing to a student's experience. This is something that is never, ever going away. As Pam noted earlier, this is about accountability. And at the end of the day, if we're not accountable for our work, we're going to have a lot of challenges. The biggest myth, however, is this one. Analytics is the tool my institution bought. Analytics is not a tool. It is not a one thing. It is a process. There are multiple areas of focus for analytics and data use. There are multiple stakeholders involved in this process, from students and their families, to our faculty, to accrediting agencies, to our staff and our own units, organizations with which we work, to our presidents and administrations, to our financial officers, top to bottom at the institution, and with almost every single group of folks with whom we interact, there are stakeholders associated with analytics that we need to be taking care of, which means it can't be a thing. It's got to be process-oriented. There are multiple outcomes. You can predict any number of things. You can analyze any numbers of things. And again, a single tool is not going to give you lots and lots of insights. There are lots of iterations. This is an iterative process, both determining what to buy, if you buy something or build, determining how to use it, determining how to effectively alter how it's being implemented and grown, and things along those lines. And then finally, there's multiple opportunities for improvement and growth as well. And I think I've hit all of those. So I think this is where our poll is. Is there another slide for it, Mary Lee? Did we lose Mary Lee? Maybe.
Sorry about that, I had my mic off.
That's all right.
Yeah, I don't have a slide for it, but just feel free to go into this check mark icon, put a yes or no if you're using analytics.
For those of you that are answering yes, and there's lots of them, so it's simply just, I'm just asking who is analytics? A quick, essentially, show of hands using the checkbox piece. Who's using analytics? And then if you're saying, hello, if you're saying yes, go ahead and list, if you'd like, the tool or tools or things that you're using it for in the chat box.
Alice, I believe that was you that had your hand up. I unmuted your mic if you'd like to comment.
Alice, did you have a question, or was it because the hand is next to the checkbox? Great. So, all right. Well, if you've got a question, just raise your hand again or throw it in the chat box and we can get to it. For predicting summer melts, for historical analytics to understand what's going on, homegrown, admissions, our admissions colleagues do a lot in this frame. Enrollments, career selection, career behavior, selection, these are all really, these are the types of things that we tend to use it for. We often will also use it to drive students to student success offices or resources on campus where that can help them be doing better in their coursework. Yeah, admissions and enrollment services, sure. And I think that's where, as an institution, if we're business-like at all, it really is on the EM side, right? Because we're doing a lot of applications and determining what's going to happen, and so it makes sense that the tools would take root in that side of our house initially. But it really is starting to bleed into many, many more. As Pam said, we could be using it in many, many more areas. And yes, thank you to those of you who did reply and who participated in the chat. Excuse me, in the poll itself. What I wanted to do was give you kind of a sense of where analytics is being used on multiple campuses right now. But I also want you to pay attention to the fact that our work in student affairs is generally not represented in the work that's out there right now. It is very, very much on the side of either our academic colleagues or our more the EM and statistical sides of the house. And this is something I'm hoping people will have questions about or will discuss about. If we don't do it during this hour, then definitely after the fact, because I think it's something where we can actually make a lot of impact. So Austin Peay University in Tennessee has developed a system called Degree Compass. They've sold it to Desire to Learn, which is a learning management system. Some of you may have D2L on your campuses. Bye, Pam. Thank you for coming. So anyway, so Austin Peay developed this tool, and what they're trying to do is give students a sense of the courses that they will be successful in, giving their past behavior and how they were doing in other classes, and how they performed in other coursework, as well as how they performed in their coursework as compared to other people like them who compare their coursework. Long story short, trying to give them a good sense of where they are going to be successful or not, so that students can make the best choice possible in terms of registration and whatnot. Rio Salado is a 2-year institution in Arizona as part of the Maricopa County College system, and they have a student support model. The interesting thing about Rio, amongst other things, is that they are about 85 to 90% online as an institution. And so most of the work is happening in an online environment. And so the arrows are indicative of which way data is flowing. So faculty has data flowing into this dashboard, which then can flow out to the student, out to an advisor, and out to instructional help desk staff. The student has a peer mentor alongside of them that can reach out to them based on this information, as well as the advisors and the instructional help desk. Point being, the action being taken here, where Austin Peay was driving action to register for courses that would be the most appropriate, Rio Salado is driving action in terms of getting the student to understand where they need to get help and then driving the help directly to them. The Open Learning Initiative has the social networking, which is SNAP analysis, S-N-A-P-P. And I can never remember what the PP stands for. The SNA is social network analysis. This one's neat because what it does is it looks at how conversations are happening in the learning management system. So inside of Blackboard or Canvas or D2L or some of the more mainstreams, and looking to see who's interacting with who. And you are very able to see then where's the nucleus of your campuses in terms of who's talking about what's, in your classes rather. You can see who are the folks disconnected from the network, like in the upper left-hand corner of this slide. You can also see where the folks who are tangentially connected, and they only have 1 or 2 lines going to them. And so you can see these nexuses, you can see the nucleus, you can see the outliers, and really then kind of start to begin to determine where to intervene. Imagine using this as an ethnography or as a form on in your residence halls of who is interacting with whom and who's not interacting with anyone. We do these already. I mean, that's the thing. When we talk about analytics, we're doing a form of basically analog analytics when we do this kind of work already. What technology does is allows us to really apply all sorts of other information as well to make the most informed decision possible and not just off observation data. Nothing wrong with just observation data. I'm a qualitative researcher myself, but it's also important to be able to consider other pieces of data as you go through these components. 2 others here. Excuse me, University of Maryland, Baltimore County has a system called Check My Activity. This allows students to know how often they're logging into Blackboard as compared to their peers. Also tells them how they're doing relative to how their peers are doing as well. So if the student's logging in maybe 5 times a week and they're getting a C, and the students who are logging in 35 times a week are getting A's, it will show them that. It will show them averages in terms of number of times people are logging in and their average progress in the course to date. Course Signals was developed by Purdue University. I was part of that team and focused on using information about the student, including past academic history, their current performance, and the extent to which they were interacting with the learning management system, which is Blackboard there, and then churned out a red, green, or yellow signal, telling them that they were in good shape. Green, you're good, keep doing what you're doing. Yellow, take caution, you're going to need to change some things, or you're in danger of not doing well. Or red, stop, we need to get some help right now. And it's still in use today. It's a publicly available tool through Ellucian, which is the same folks who make Banner. And then the University of Michigan has done a lot of work in this frame as well. They've developed a tool called Student Explorer, which really is designed for advisors to use course data to help them be the most effective with their students as they move into things. So that's about all I have from a content standpoint. I do want to make sure that you've got questions, we can answer them, we can tweet about them, we can chat about them. But at the end of the day, what I want you to walk away from is that analytics is about action. Analytics is about changing behavior writ large. The theory behind it is really the one I most espouse to. I didn't put a slide in here, but I usually espouse to Aston's IEO model, the inputs being the students, the output being the outcome that we want to see, and the environment being the area that we have the control over and the ability to influence by using data, by using analytics, and really make the processes work the best for all involved. I think that hits on all 4 of my original learning objectives, but what questions or what discussions would you like to have? We've got about 13 or 14 minutes left. Nothing.
Anybody would like to use their mic to ask a question, again, just please raise your hand and I can unmute you. Matt, I actually have a question.
Sure.
In terms of like early alert technology, can you talk a little bit about how that intersects with predictive analytics? So, like for example, here at Cumberland County College, we'll be adopting Starfish platform. I wonder if you have any experience and knowledge about that or other platforms and how that might factor in.
Sure, there are several pieces out there, and thank you, Mary Lou, that's a great question. Starfish is actually very similar to Signals. It's not clearly an exact replica, it is its own component. And the EAB, the Educational Advisory Board, has a system called Student Success Collaborative. There are other ones out there as well. The early warning system, it depends on how the system is working. If it is one where faculty members are flagging students that need assistance, where they've recognized a behavior that needs to be addressed or things along those lines, we're not talking so much predictive as much as we're using data to drive the decision to interact with the students that need help. Starfish does have a predictive model on the back end of it. Student Success Collaborative also has a predictive model behind it. The key thing to remember with those, and actually with most products, is that they are proprietary models. And so they're going to ask you for a whole lot of data. They're going to churn through the algorithm, and they're going to give you a result that may or may not be able to be drawn back directly. Well, it can draw back directly to your data, but you may or may not know how they got there. But at the end of the day, it really is, are you identifying students and then intervening, which is still a form of analytics, or are you predicting what's going to happen given a whole lot of existing data and then intervening based on what that prediction comes from? So early analytics, or excuse me, early warning systems can be both predictive and not. And I think I answered your question.
I think that there's a related question from the AER team at the University of Utah. So while analytics is not just a software tool, what kind of tool would you recommend to facilitate analytics?
Well, being the good assessment person that I am, my question to that is going to be, it depends based on what it is you want to affect. And if you want to get a little bit deeper into your question, you certainly can. because there are lots of different things out there, but it really depends on where you want to have your greatest effect as to what it is that you want to engage with. And we can certainly talk about this online as well. Or offline, let me know. I'm happy to kind of engage and talk a little bit more, because there really isn't just one tool or one approach. There are lots of different things that you can go towards. Don Norris and Linda Baer, B-A-E-R, I'll type that into the box, have done some work on the surveying the field and the landscape of analytics. And so if you search them in analytics, you will be able to see some of their pieces. Some of their work will come up, and you can see there's a lot of different things happening out there. And so it really is dependent upon what it is that you're trying to do in order to make to choose the most appropriate thing for your campus. Judd talks about anyone using analytics in student involvement or campus activities, or incorporating tracking of student involvement into institutional data sets to become part of the business intelligence. This is a fabulous thing that I hope there are campuses working on. Not as many as we'd like, Judd, but there are some who are incorporating this data. Purdue is one of them. Indiana University is moving down that road. There are others as well that are starting to incorporate this data into those institutional data sets. Are usually called operational data stores or data warehouses, and those are becoming more and more prevalent on campuses, and their prevalence is also starting to include our data, our student affairs data, not just where students are living, but what are they doing, where are they involved, what clubs and organizations are they doing, how many things related to community service and service learning are they doing. It's happening more and more. It's a very, very slow process that's happening now. And so to the extent that you can encourage and engage in conversation on your campuses, there's a lot that can be gained from tying these data sets together and looking at not only what our students doing in the classroom and their background in academic history, but also how are they interacting with us as an institution, tying all those pieces together and starting to determine who is most likely to need somebody to reach out to them versus not. Kim talks about good resources when we learn technical details. I can certainly put together a brief reading list, and we can make that available via the listserv or mail it out to those of the folks who registered today. Some of my resources, the slides, my last slide, are some of my references, or actually all of my references, but I can also put together a reading list for you, Kim. Alice talks about her impression being that student affairs units are not the predominant users just yet. That is correct. More business processes types users and academic users, yes. It also looks like institutions with large online sector might be the folks to whom to look. I believe you're dead on with a lot of these. I think the easiest place to start was the business side because that's where the history was. Then the academic piece was the next big ubiquitous thing, because while every campus has some form of student affairs, the academic pieces and courses are really ubiquitous across every single institution. And so I think you're hitting it right on the head. And to be looking, not necessarily the large online sector, although University of Phoenix and Rio Salado both have done a lot of work in this frame, there are a lot of brick and mortar institutions that have done a lot of this work as well. And so, places like Purdue, like UMBC, like Boston P. In California, Orange County Community Colleges have done a lot of work. In Ohio, the Sinclair County Community College has done work in this frame. So Texas A&M, most famously at the end of last year, their provost, or beginning of this year maybe, wrote a, I guess it was beginning of last year, January 2015 or February of 2015, wrote the article, the Who Gets to Graduate. That's all about their use, and that's UT Austin actually, I think. But that's all using analytics in terms of determining who do we need to intervene with. So it's not the student making this decision or the institution writ large making the decision as to whether or not someone's going to be able to graduate, that we're able to inform it with data and then intervene with those who need the most help the soonest and in a timely enough fashion. How do you reconcile the different definitions of student success? You don't. You really can't, because you've got to look at, in order to graduate from your institution, at the end of the day, students have to have academic success. And so you've got to address that component first. The career success, that's a longitudinal one. What we want to be able to do is show that success in the classroom and success outside of the classroom actually yields success in their eventual careers. And so if anything, you don't need to reconcile them. You need to show how they relate and the order, if there is one, that they should go in order to be address them over time. In a specific student affairs context, what points of data might be linked for data analytic purposes? So this is where, Mark, you ask a great question, and this is where we get into the creepy treehouse of analytics. And that is, everything our students do is tracked on our campuses. If we have swipe card access to our buildings, there's a log someplace that indicates when a student swiped in. If a student has to swipe into a dining court or into a residence hall to use a certain help room, to use the recreational facilities, the gym, things along those lines, there's an opportunity there for a logging of data. We can then use those data points and begin to correlate that against student success. We can use it as a predictor of retention potentially, and use it as one of our independent variables in terms of did they go or not, did they use it or not, how many times did they use it or not, so you can be able to get into different ways of looking at that. And when you start stringing these pieces together, I mean, one of the things you might find, I firmly believe actually, and at some point I would like to be able to do this study, that if we look at dining hall usage patterns of students who have purchased our meal plans, my guess is that students who have purchased them and tend to use some small number, some small percentage of those meals are likely the ones who are also not involved on our campuses because they're probably elsewhere most of the time. They're either in class, they're working, they're off campus, they're not using essentially a prepaid service. And that's something to potentially pay attention to and find a spot to intervene. That would be one spot. Another place would be looking at like rec center usage or health center usage or things along those lines. Mark, if you have other questions, please feel free to reach out. Do I see models of meta-analytics that incorporate multiple definitions I presented early? No, and the reason is that each product, each company, each institution kind of takes a different tack depending on what it is they're trying to achieve. The definitions kind of all relate to one another, but Bill, one of the things you need to remember is that we have only really been around for about 10 to 12 years in higher education. And so some of these multiple definitions will shake out into singular ones or binary ones in the fullness of time, but that's going to take a little bit of time to get there because we're still trying to figure out, quite frankly, how to walk. And we got to walk before we can drive, and I think the driving part will come once we do have some very solid concurrence around what is and what is not analytics. But as technology changes, as we gain new ways of looking at data, as our computing platforms and our data collection improve and increase, I think there's still going to be a lot of swirling around of what the actual quote-unquote definition is until we get to a point of kind of some solid ground to land on. Who else we got here? Belinda, we are collecting data but finding it difficult to integrate with institutional data. Data is very siloed. Yes, it is. And there are people on your campuses who believe that it is their job to stand in front of that data and not let anybody touch it. I don't call it siloed, I actually call it bunkered because it's not even visible sometimes. It's underground, behind doors, and nobody knows that it's there. Shadow databases are not your friend. If you keep one, please do not, please don't. Please stop doing it. Please figure out how to move those into your mainstream data sets because, as we just talked about, the more data everybody has access to, the better off everyone is going to be. But those conversations, Belinda, are going to happen at that vice president level, with the CIO, with the IT folks, and with the governance, the data governance folks, to begin to kind of figure out who should be able to have access to what data, when, with what level of usage, and things along those lines. I think that's a very astute point, and we can only start breaking those down by asking for it and then not contributing to that behavior ourselves. Sliding along. I think that's it. I think I got all the questions unless there are any other ones or folks have a burning one that they want to ask over the mic. Yes, ride a bike. Then maybe drive. Then regressions. Very good. Yes, don't try to drive and do regressions at the same time. That's probably not healthy. All right. I think that's it. That's all I've got. Mary Lee, do you have any closing comments?
Okay, so everybody's just thinking, I just want to make sure we're not missing anyone's questions. I just want to thank you very much for joining us today this is probably one of the most active, structured conversations I've seen in terms of Q&A at the end in a while. And I appreciate everybody who's been contributing on Twitter. I would encourage folks to continue the conversation on Twitter. Why not? That's what it's there for. So feel free to tweet to Matt, myself, the Student Affairs Assessment leaders, and other colleagues to keep this conversation going. In the meantime, I wanted you all to know our next conversation will be on Tuesday, May 3rd with Larry Long, Management Analyst at Michigan State University. And we are lucky that Larry will be continuing this discussion of learning analytics and big data, focusing on the application in student affairs. So we'll be sending out the registration information in the next couple of weeks. So once again, thank you, Matt, very much for joining us today. When we have the recording available, we'll send it out to the list along with the slides. And Matt, if you have another resource list you'd like to share, I can include that as well.
Share that. And real quick, folks, if you wanted to hear a little bit more about kind of the foundings of learning analytics, you can go to solaresearch.org or Solar Research, however you want to read that. It's Solar and Research and the R is shared. The end of April, if you follow on the hashtag LAK16, that's Learning Analytics and Knowledge. Those are Learning Analytics Conference in Edinburgh, Scotland. That's a fairly active hashtag. I'm fairly active on it anyway, and there'll be lots of others as well. So if you kind of want to get a real understanding of the research that's happening in learning analytics, there's going to be a lot happening on that hashtag the last week of this month. Thank you all for your participation. We'll get those materials out to you soon. And have a good afternoon.
Good, everybody. Have a good afternoon, and we'll see you next month. And thanks again, Matt.
You're welcome.